My name is Rachel Turner. I'm 34 years old, and after spending 15 years building a successful real estate empire worth $8 million through careful investments, smart business decisions, and countless personal sacrifices, my mother Dorothy pressured me into signing over my entire estate to my financially irresponsible sister Kelly because your sister needs it more than you do, claiming that keeping my hard-earned wealth while family members struggled was selfish and unchristian behavior. What she didn't know was that her demand for me to transfer my assets to Kelly would also transfer something else she hadn't considered: the $400,000 in business loans, mortgages, and financial obligations that made my real estate empire possible, and that my generous sacrifice was about to become Kelly's complete financial destruction when she discovered that wealth comes with responsibilities she could never handle. The real estate empire that my family was so eager to redistribute had been built from absolutely nothing, starting with my first duplex purchase at age 19 when I was working 2 jobs while attending community college and living on ramen noodles to save every possible penny for a down payment. That first property required me to live in one unit while renting the other to cover the mortgage, spending my evenings and weekends doing repairs, maintenance, and tenant management while my friends went to parties and enjoyed typical college experiences. "Rachel, you're missing out on the best years of your life by working so much," my sister Kelly would say whenever she visited my cramped duplex unit that I had furnished with garage sale finds and hand-me-down furniture. "You should be having fun instead of playing landlord to strangers." But I understood something that Kelly never grasped. Every hour of work and every dollar saved was an investment in my future financial independence. While she was spending her 20s on expensive dinners, designer clothes, and spontaneous shopping sprees funded by credit cards, I was building equity, learning property management skills, and developing the expertise that would eventually allow me to expand from one duplex to a portfolio of 12 rental properties across 3 different neighborhoods. The business I built around my real estate investments grew organically as I learned to identify undervalued properties, negotiate favorable purchase terms, and manage renovations that increased property values while keeping costs reasonable. My property management company evolved naturally from managing my own rentals to helping other investors maximize their returns through professional maintenance, tenant screening, and financial optimization. "You're so lucky to have found success in real estate," Kelly would say during family gatherings where I shared updates about my latest property acquisition or business milestone. "I wish I had your natural talent for making money." The characterization of my success as luck and natural talent, rather than recognizing the years of education, hard work, and strategic planning that had built my empire, was both frustrating and typical of Kelly's approach to understanding achievement. She consistently attributed other people's success to advantages she didn't have, rather than acknowledging the choices and sacrifices that created those advantages. By age 30, I owned my primary residence outright, had accumulated 11 rental properties with positive cash flow, and operated a property management business that served over 40 clients and generated substantial monthly revenue. The portfolio was worth $8 million according to recent appraisals, but more importantly, it provided the passive income and financial security that allowed me to pursue opportunities and weather economic challenges without the financial anxiety that characterized most people's relationship with money. "Rachel has been so blessed with her real estate success," my mother Dorothy would tell relatives and friends, as if my achievements were random gifts rather than the result of 15 years of disciplined saving, strategic investing, and professional development. "She's built such a comfortable life for herself." The religious framing of my success as blessings, while ignoring the work and sacrifice involved, was typical of how my family understood wealth creation. They preferred to view financial success as something that happened to people rather than something people created through specific decisions and sustained effort. But while I was building my real estate empire through careful planning and reinvestment of profits, Kelly was creating a very different kind of financial story through a series of poor decisions, failed business ventures, and irresponsible spending habits that consistently left her facing financial crises that required family intervention and support. Kelly's financial problems began in college when she maxed out multiple credit cards on spring break trips, designer clothing, and entertainment expenses that far exceeded her part-time job income. Instead of addressing her spending habits or seeking financial education, she treated each crisis as a temporary setback that could be solved through family loans, debt consolidation, or finding new credit sources. "I just need to get through this rough patch," Kelly would say whenever she approached family members for financial assistance. "Once I figure out my career situation, I'll be able to pay everyone back and get my finances under control." The rough patch narrative persisted for over a decade, as Kelly cycled through various career attempts, business ventures, and get-rich-quick schemes that never generated sustainable income but consistently required additional financial investment from family members who wanted to support her potential, rather than acknowledge her pattern of irresponsible decision-making. Her most recent business failure involved a boutique clothing store that she opened without adequate market research, business planning, or financial reserves. The store lasted 8 months before closing due to poor location choice, excessive inventory purchases, and Kelly's inability to manage basic business finances or understand retail profit margins. The boutique was ahead of its time, Kelly explained when the business failed, and left her with $60,000 in additional debt. "People in this area just aren't ready for the kind of sophisticated fashion sense I was offering." Have you ever watched someone consistently blame external factors for problems that were obviously caused by their own poor judgment and planning? That's exactly what I was witnessing as Kelly refused to acknowledge her role in creating the financial disasters that were destroying her credit and requiring ongoing family support. But while Kelly's latest business failure was devastating for her personally, it was also creating a family crisis that would ultimately target my successful real estate empire as the solution to her financial problems. My mother, Dorothy, was becoming increasingly frustrated with Kelly's struggles and increasingly resentful of my financial security during a period when her favorite daughter was facing potential bankruptcy. "It's not fair that Rachel has so much money when Kelly is struggling so badly," Dorothy confided to me during one of our phone conversations about Kelly's latest financial crisis. "Family members should help each other, especially when some people have been blessed with more resources than they could ever need." The suggestion that my financial success created an obligation to solve Kelly's self-created problems was both morally questionable and financially dangerous. But it was also the beginning of a family pressure campaign that would eventually target everything I had worked 15 years to build and protect. The family pressure campaign that would ultimately destroy my relationship with my mother and sister began innocuously enough, with Dorothy making casual comments about the unfairness of wealth distribution within our family, and subtle suggestions that I should be more generous in helping Kelly recover from her latest financial disasters. "Rachel, you have 12 rental properties and Kelly is facing bankruptcy," Dorothy said during one of our regular family dinners. "Don't you think there's something morally wrong with that picture? How can you enjoy your success when your own sister is struggling so badly?" The guilt-based manipulation was both transparent and effective, because it targeted my genuine love for my family, while completely ignoring the fundamental differences in financial decision-making that had created our different outcomes. Dorothy wanted me to feel responsible for Kelly's problems while treating my success as an unfair advantage rather than earned achievement. "Mom, I've offered to help Kelly learn about budgeting, real estate investing, and business planning," I replied, trying to address her concerns while maintaining appropriate boundaries about financial responsibility. "But she's not interested in learning about wealth building. She just wants immediate solutions to her spending problems." "Rachel, Kelly doesn't need lectures about money management," Dorothy responded with obvious frustration at my unwillingness to provide unconditional financial rescue. "She needs actual help from family members who have the resources to make a real difference in her situation." The dismissal of financial education as lectures, while demanding actual help in the form of money, perfectly captured Dorothy's understanding of wealth as something that should be redistributed based on need rather than earned through competence and responsibility. She wanted me to treat Kelly's financial problems as emergencies that required my resources rather than consequences that required Kelly's behavior change. "What kind of help are you expecting from me?" I asked, already dreading the answer but needing to understand the scope of what Dorothy was requesting. "Kelly needs a fresh start," Dorothy replied with the tone of someone who had been planning this conversation for weeks. "She needs her debts paid off, a place to live that she can afford, and maybe a small business that could generate steady income without the risks that caused her boutique to fail." The comprehensive financial rescue package that Dorothy was proposing would have cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars while providing Kelly with advantages she had never worked to earn and would likely squander within a few years based on her established pattern of financial irresponsibility. "Mom, what you're describing would require me to liquidate a significant portion of my real estate portfolio," I said, trying to help her understand the magnitude of what she was requesting. "I can't just write a check for that kind of money. It would require selling properties that took me years to acquire and that generate the passive income I depend on for financial security." "Rachel, you have more money than you could spend in a lifetime," Dorothy replied with dismissive confidence about my financial situation that revealed how little she understood about real estate investing, business cash flow, or the difference between net worth and liquid assets. Have you ever tried to explain complex financial concepts to someone who is determined to view your success as hoarded resources that should be redistributed to solve other people's problems? That's exactly what I was experiencing as Dorothy dismissed my concerns about liquidating productive assets to fund Kelly's consumption and debt payments. "Besides," Dorothy continued, "keeping all that wealth while your sister faces bankruptcy isn't Christian behavior. The Bible teaches us to share with those in need, and Kelly needs help more than you need additional properties and rental income." The religious guilt combined with family obligation created a psychological pressure campaign that was both emotionally manipulative and strategically calculated to overcome my rational objections to destroying my financial security for Kelly's temporary relief from problems she had created through her own choices. "What if I helped Kelly find a job in property management or real estate?" I suggested, as an alternative that would provide her with income and career development without requiring me to sacrifice my own financial stability. I could teach her the business and help her build legitimate skills that would provide long-term financial security. "Kelly isn't interested in working for you," Dorothy replied immediately, revealing that she and Kelly had already discussed this possibility and rejected it in favor of demanding direct asset transfer. "She needs her own opportunities, not a job where she'd be dependent on her sister's approval and supervision." The rejection of employment and training opportunities in favor of demanding ownership of assets she hadn't earned was both predictable and revealing about Kelly's fundamental approach to wealth acquisition. She wanted the benefits of my success without the work, learning, or responsibility that had created that success. But while Dorothy continued to pressure me with guilt, religious obligation, and family loyalty arguments, she was also revealing something important about her expectations. She wanted me to transfer significant portions of my wealth to Kelly without any conditions, oversight, or requirements that would ensure the money would be used responsibly or lead to sustainable financial improvement. "Kelly deserves a chance to succeed without constantly worrying about money," Dorothy said during one of our most intense conversations about family financial redistribution. "You could give her that chance by sharing some of your success instead of hoarding it for yourself." The months of relentless family pressure, combined with my genuine desire to help Kelly and my exhaustion from constantly defending my right to keep the assets I had earned, was beginning to wear down my resistance to their demands for wealth redistribution that would solve Kelly's problems while creating new ones for me. The relentless family pressure campaign continued for 6 months, with Dorothy escalating her emotional manipulation and guilt-based arguments, while enlisting other family members to support her demand that I sacrifice my real estate empire to provide Kelly with a fresh start that would solve all of her self-created financial problems. "Rachel, your Aunt Patricia thinks you should help Kelly too," Dorothy informed me during one of our increasingly frequent conversations about wealth redistribution. "She says it's selfish to have so much when family members are suffering, and that you should remember where you came from and who supported you when you were getting started." The recruitment of extended family members into the pressure campaign was both predictable and effective, because it created the impression that my resistance to liquidating my assets for Kelly's benefit was a moral failing that multiple people recognized and disapproved of, rather than a reasonable boundary about financial responsibility. "Mom, I worked 2 jobs while going to college and lived on ramen noodles for years to buy my first property," I replied, trying once again to explain that my success hadn't been supported by family money, but created through personal sacrifice that Kelly had never been willing to make. "Nobody helped me get started. I built everything through my own work and smart financial decisions." "Rachel, you're being ungrateful and selfish," Dorothy responded with increasing anger at my continued resistance to her demands. "Family should help family, and you have the resources to solve Kelly's problems if you cared more about your sister than your bank account." The characterization of my financial boundaries as caring more about money than family was both emotionally manipulative and factually absurd, since providing Kelly with unearned assets would enable her continued irresponsibility rather than helping her develop the skills and discipline necessary for genuine financial stability. But the family pressure was becoming increasingly difficult to resist, especially when Dorothy began incorporating religious guilt, family loyalty, and social obligation arguments into comprehensive campaigns designed to overcome my rational objections to destroying my financial security for Kelly's temporary relief. "What would your father think if he could see how selfish you've become about money?" Dorothy asked during one particularly manipulative conversation, referring to my deceased father, who had always encouraged both Kelly and me to be responsible and self-reliant. He would be disappointed that his daughter became the kind of person who hoards wealth while family members struggle. The invocation of my father's memory in service of demands he never would have supported was both cruel and revealing about how desperate Dorothy was becoming to find emotional leverage that would force me to comply with her financial redistribution scheme. Have you ever been told that a deceased parent would be disappointed in your financial responsibility because you wouldn't enable a sibling's continued irresponsibility? That's exactly what I was experiencing, as Dorothy used every possible form of emotional manipulation to overcome my resistance to liquidating my life's work. "Kelly is talking about filing for bankruptcy if she can't get help from family," Dorothy continued with what was clearly intended as an ultimatum. "Is that really what you want? Your sister's credit and reputation ruined because you wouldn't share some of your success to help her get back on her feet?" The threat of Kelly's bankruptcy as something I would be responsible for preventing through personal financial sacrifice was both manipulative and revealing about Dorothy's fundamental misunderstanding of personal responsibility and the relationship between choices and consequences. "Mom, Kelly created her financial problems through years of irresponsible spending and poor business decisions," I said, trying one final time to shift the focus from my obligations to Kelly's choices. "Giving her money won't solve her underlying problems with financial discipline and decision-making. It will just enable her to create new problems." "Rachel, I'm tired of your excuses and your selfishness," Dorothy replied with finality that indicated she was no longer interested in rational discussion about financial responsibility or appropriate boundaries. "Kelly needs your help, and if you won't provide it voluntarily, then you're not the daughter I raised you to be." The ultimatum was clear. Either I would liquidate significant portions of my real estate empire to fund Kelly's financial rescue, or I would be excluded from family relationships and treated as a selfish person who had abandoned her values and responsibilities in favor of personal wealth accumulation. The exhaustion from months of emotional manipulation, combined with my genuine love for Kelly despite her financial irresponsibility, and my desire to maintain family relationships despite Dorothy's unreasonable demands, finally overwhelmed my rational understanding of why enabling Kelly's problems was both financially dangerous and personally destructive. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I said with resignation that indicated my resistance was finally breaking down under the sustained pressure campaign. Transfer some of your properties to Kelly so she can have rental income and a place to live without mortgage payments. Dorothy replied immediately, revealing that she had been planning specific asset redistribution schemes while pressuring me to accept the general concept of wealth sharing. Maybe your primary residence and a few rental properties, Dorothy continued with obvious excitement at my apparent willingness to consider her demands. Enough to give Kelly a fresh start and steady income without destroying your own financial security. The proposal to transfer my primary residence plus rental properties represented hundreds of thousands of dollars in assets that I had worked 15 years to acquire. But Dorothy was presenting it as a reasonable family assistance package rather than recognizing it as a devastating sacrifice of my financial independence. But as I prepared to agree to Dorothy's demands out of exhaustion and family loyalty, I was also beginning to understand something that would ultimately make their wealth redistribution scheme far more complex and expensive than they had ever imagined. My real estate empire wasn't just assets that could be transferred. It was also obligations, debts, and responsibilities that came with property ownership and business management. The family that was so eager to redistribute my wealth was about to learn that assets and liabilities are inseparable, and that Kelly's fresh start was going to include fresh financial responsibilities she had never considered and could never handle. The legal transfer of my properties to Kelly took 3 weeks to complete, during which Dorothy orchestrated every detail while presenting the asset redistribution as my generous gift to help Kelly build a better life, rather than acknowledging it as the result of months of emotional manipulation and family pressure that had finally broken down my resistance to their demands. "Rachel, I'm so proud of you for doing the right thing," Dorothy said while we sat in the attorney's office watching Kelly sign documents that would make her the owner of my primary residence plus 4 of my best rental properties, representing over $1.2 million in real estate assets that I was transferring without compensation or conditions. The legal documentation was complex because my properties weren't just simple asset transfers. They were business assets with mortgages, maintenance obligations, tenant relationships, and ongoing financial responsibilities that required sophisticated understanding of real estate management and cash flow analysis. These properties generate about $4,800 per month in rental income after expenses, I explained to Kelly as we reviewed the financial documentation. But that's gross income. You'll need to budget for maintenance, property taxes, insurance, vacancy periods, and occasional major repairs or improvements. "I understand," Kelly replied with confidence that revealed how little she actually understood about property management complexity. "I'll figure out the details as I go." How hard can it be to collect rent and maintain a few properties? The casual dismissal of property management as simple rent collection demonstrated exactly why Dorothy's wealth redistribution scheme was going to fail spectacularly. But I was no longer invested in protecting Kelly from the consequences of her family's demands for unearned assets. Have you ever watched someone accept complex financial responsibilities while demonstrating complete ignorance about what those responsibilities actually involved? That's exactly what I was witnessing as Kelly signed documents that made her responsible for property management, tenant relations, and financial obligations she had never considered. "Kelly, you're going to love living in Rachel's beautiful house," Dorothy said with obvious satisfaction at the successful completion of their asset redistribution plan. "And the rental income will provide the financial security you need to build a stable future without worrying about money." The celebration of Kelly's new asset ownership while completely ignoring the obligations that came with those assets was both premature and revealing about their fundamental misunderstanding of wealth as something that could be separated from the responsibilities that made wealth creation and maintenance possible. But what Dorothy and Kelly didn't realize was that the legal transfers I had just completed included something they hadn't anticipated or prepared for. Along with the properties, I had also transferred all associated debts, mortgages, business loans, and financial obligations that were secured by those assets and required monthly payments totaling over $3,400. The 4 rental properties Kelly had just received came with existing mortgages totaling $280,000 that required monthly payments, whether or not tenants paid rent on time. The property management business I had also transferred included equipment loans and business credit lines totaling another $120,000 that required monthly servicing regardless of business revenue generation. "Are you sure you understand all the financial obligations that come with these properties?" I asked Kelly one final time as we completed the paperwork, knowing that she had never demonstrated the financial literacy or business management skills necessary to handle complex real estate investments. "Rachel, stop being so negative," Dorothy interjected before Kelly could respond. "Kelly will learn what she needs to know, and she'll have rental income to cover any expenses. This is a fresh start, not a burden." The characterization of $400,000 in debt obligations as not a burden perfectly captured Dorothy's complete ignorance about the financial realities of real estate ownership and business management. But I was no longer responsible for educating them about concepts they had refused to understand during months of pressure to redistribute my assets. As we left the attorney's office that day, I felt a mixture of relief at ending the family pressure campaign and anticipation about what would happen when Kelly discovered that property ownership involved more than just collecting rent checks and enjoying asset appreciation. "Thank you so much for this incredible gift," Kelly said as she hugged me outside the law office. "I promise I'll take good care of everything and make you proud of how I use this opportunity." The promise to make me proud while demonstrating no understanding of property management, debt service, or business operations was both touching and irrelevant, since I was no longer invested in her success or failure with the assets and obligations she had just inherited. Within days of the property transfer, Kelly was posting social media updates about her amazing new life and fresh opportunities, featuring photos of herself relaxing in my former living room and celebrating her sudden transformation from bankruptcy threat to property owner, without acknowledging the work, sacrifice, or financial expertise that had created the wealth she was now enjoying. "Living my best life in my beautiful new home," Kelly posted with photos of expensive furniture I had accumulated over years of careful purchasing. "So grateful for this fresh start and excited about building something amazing with my real estate investments." The social media narrative about her real estate investments, without any mention of my 15 years of work to acquire those properties, was both predictable and irrelevant, since Kelly was about to learn that successful real estate investing required ongoing effort and financial management, rather than just asset ownership. But while Kelly celebrated her windfall and Dorothy praised her daughter's good fortune, I was already beginning the process of rebuilding my career and financial independence, using the knowledge and experience that couldn't be transferred along with the properties I had given away. The woman who had been pressured into giving away her real estate empire was about to demonstrate that wealth comes from competence rather than assets, while the family that had demanded redistribution of unearned resources was about to learn that ownership includes obligations they had never considered and couldn't handle. The first indication that Kelly's fresh start was becoming a financial disaster came exactly 6 weeks after the property transfer, when I received a text message from my father, Dennis, that would reveal how quickly Dorothy's wealth redistribution plan was creating new problems far worse than Kelly's original bankruptcy threat. "Rachel, we need to talk. Loan payment overdue." "Kelly doesn't understand what's happening," the message read, with an urgency that immediately told me the family was discovering that property ownership involved financial obligations they hadn't anticipated or prepared for during their campaign to redistribute my assets. I waited 2 hours before responding, using the time to reflect on how satisfying it felt to watch Kelly and Dorothy confront the reality that assets and responsibilities are inseparable, and that the wealth they had been so eager to redistribute came with obligations they had never considered. "Which loan payment?" I finally replied, knowing perfectly well that Kelly was now responsible for over $400,000 in mortgages and business debts that required monthly payments totaling more than the rental income generated by the properties she had inherited. "The business loan payment for $2,800 is 3 days overdue, and Kelly says she doesn't know anything about business loans," Dennis responded with obvious panic about financial obligations that Kelly had inherited along with the assets, but had never been educated about during Dorothy's pressure campaign. The business loan that was now Kelly's responsibility had been used to fund property improvements and equipment purchases that increased rental income and property values, but it required monthly payments whether or not Kelly understood business finance or had sufficient cash flow to service the debt. There are also mortgage payments due on the rental properties that Kelly says are more than the rent she's collecting, Dennis continued, revealing that Kelly was discovering the difference between gross rental income and net cash flow after debt service, maintenance, and operational expenses. Have you ever felt the satisfaction of watching people who demanded your assets discover that wealth comes with responsibilities they never considered? That's exactly what I was experiencing as my family learned that Kelly's fresh start included fresh financial obligations she couldn't handle. Kelly is panicking because she can't make the payments and doesn't understand how to manage rental properties or run a property management business, Dennis added with desperation that revealed how quickly their asset redistribution celebration was turning into a financial crisis, worse than Kelly's original problems. The panic about Kelly's inability to handle basic property management and debt service was both predictable and satisfying, since I had repeatedly tried to explain during the pressure campaign that successful real estate investing required skills and knowledge that couldn't be transferred along with asset ownership. She's talking about selling the properties, but she says there are restrictions and complications she doesn't understand, Dennis continued, apparently hoping I would provide guidance about the complex financial situation Kelly had inherited along with the assets she had demanded. The restrictions and complications Kelly was discovering included loan covenants, transfer restrictions, and business agreements that prevented simple asset liquidation without significant penalties and potential legal consequences that would make selling the properties more expensive than keeping them. Rachel, Kelly needs help understanding how to manage these properties and debt payments, Dennis finally admitted with the kind of humility that had been completely absent during months of demanding that I sacrifice my financial security to solve Kelly's self-created problems. She didn't need to understand property management when she was demanding my assets, I replied with the first direct acknowledgement of how their pressure campaign had ignored the complexity of what they were redistributing. But now that she owns the properties and the debts, she's responsible for learning how to handle both. Rachel, this is family, Dennis responded with the same guilt-based manipulation they had used to pressure me into the asset transfer. Kelly is in over her head and needs guidance from someone who understands real estate and business management. The expectation that I should now provide free consulting services to help Kelly manage the assets and debts she had inherited was both presumptuous and revealing about their continued view of me as someone whose expertise should be available to solve their problems without compensation or appreciation. Kelly inherited 15 years of my work along with the properties, I said with finality that indicated I was no longer interested in enabling their financial incompetence. She also inherited the responsibility for learning how to manage what she demanded to own. The phone calls and text messages from various family members continued over the following weeks, each more desperate than the last as Kelly's financial situation deteriorated rapidly, and the family discovered that wealth redistribution had created problems far worse than the bankruptcy threat they had been trying to prevent. Rachel, Kelly is facing foreclosure on 2 of the rental properties because she can't make the mortgage payments. Dorothy called to inform me about consequences that were both predictable and satisfying. She needs help figuring out how to increase rental income or reduce expenses. The foreclosure threat was exactly what I had expected would happen when someone with no property management experience inherited complex real estate investments with high debt levels and operational requirements that exceeded her skill set and available cash flow. Kelly made her choices about property ownership, I replied to Dorothy with the same dismissive tone she had used when pressuring me to sacrifice my assets. Now she gets to live with the consequences of those choices. The family that had spent months demanding redistribution of my wealth was finally learning that assets come with obligations, and that Kelly's fresh start was rapidly becoming her complete financial destruction. The complete collapse of Kelly's inherited real estate empire accelerated over the following month, as her inability to manage basic property operations, service debt obligations, or understand rental business fundamentals created a cascade of financial disasters that ultimately left her worse off than her original bankruptcy threat. Rachel, Kelly lost 3 tenants this month because she doesn't know how to handle maintenance requests or lease renewals. My Uncle Robert called to update me on the rapidly deteriorating situation. The rental income has dropped to $1,100 per month, but the debt payments are still $3,400. The $1,600 monthly cash flow deficit was exactly the kind of problem that required sophisticated financial management, emergency reserves, and business expertise that Kelly had never developed during her years of avoiding financial responsibility and depending on family bailouts to solve her self-created crises. She's also facing major repair expenses for the HVAC system in the duplex and roof replacement on one of the houses, Robert continued, revealing that Kelly was discovering the capital expenditure requirements that experienced property investors budget for, but amateur owners never anticipate. The maintenance and repair obligations that came with property ownership were particularly devastating for Kelly because she had never developed the vendor relationships, cost estimation skills, or emergency reserve funds necessary to handle the inevitable expenses that make real estate investing profitable for knowledgeable investors but ruinous for unprepared amateurs. Kelly is talking about declaring bankruptcy because she says the properties are costing her more money than she has, Robert added with obvious concern about financial problems that were spiraling beyond Kelly's ability to comprehend or control. Have you ever watched someone discover that the assets they demanded to own actually required expertise and resources they didn't possess? That's exactly what was happening, as Kelly learned that successful property management involves much more than collecting rent checks and hoping for the best. The property management business is also failing because Kelly doesn't understand client relations, vendor management, or financial reporting. My cousin Jennifer informed me during another update call about Kelly's comprehensive business collapse. The property management business that had taken me years to build through client development, operational systems, and industry expertise was dissolving rapidly under Kelly's management because she had inherited the assets without inheriting the knowledge, relationships, or skills necessary to operate a service business successfully. She's lost 6 clients in the past month because she doesn't respond to maintenance emergencies promptly and can't provide basic financial reporting that property owners expect from professional management companies. Jennifer continued. The client attrition was both predictable and irreversible, since property management is a relationship-based business that depends on trust, competence, and reliability that takes years to build but can be destroyed within weeks by inexperienced management and poor customer service. But while Kelly's business was failing and her properties were facing foreclosure, she was also discovering that bankruptcy wouldn't solve her problems because the debt obligations she had inherited were secured by assets that creditors could seize to recover their investments. Kelly found out that filing for bankruptcy won't discharge the business loans because they're secured by equipment and property that the lenders can repossess. Dorothy called to inform me about legal realities that Kelly was learning too late to prevent her financial destruction. The secured debt structure that had enabled my real estate empire by providing favorable interest rates and flexible repayment terms was now working against Kelly because lenders had recourse to the underlying assets regardless of her personal bankruptcy status. She's also facing personal liability for business debts that she guaranteed when the properties were transferred. Dorothy continued with growing panic about legal obligations that Kelly had unknowingly accepted, along with the asset ownership she had demanded. The personal guarantees that responsible business owners understand as part of leveraging assets for growth were becoming Kelly's nightmare, as lenders pursued both business assets and personal liability to recover loans that she could no longer service due to her operational incompetence. Within 6 weeks of inheriting my real estate empire, Kelly was facing complete financial ruin that would leave her with no assets, damaged credit, ongoing debt obligations, and legal liability that exceeded her original bankruptcy threat by hundreds of thousands of dollars. "Rachel, we need your help," Dorothy finally called to beg for assistance from the daughter she had pressured into creating this disaster. "Kelly is losing everything, and the family doesn't understand how to stop the foreclosures and business failures." The request for help from the same people who had spent months dismissing my concerns about Kelly's financial literacy and business management capabilities was both ironic and irrelevant, since Kelly was now legally responsible for consequences that could only be resolved through competence she had never developed. "Kelly wanted to own my assets without earning the expertise to manage them," I replied to Dorothy with satisfaction that felt both appropriate and overdue. "Now she gets to learn what happens when you demand wealth without understanding the responsibilities that create and maintain wealth." The family that had pressured me to redistribute my success was finally discovering that wealth isn't just money and assets. It's knowledge, skills, relationships, and ongoing effort that can't be transferred through legal documents or family pressure campaigns. The final collapse of Kelly's inherited empire occurred exactly 10 weeks after the property transfer, when simultaneous foreclosure actions, business liquidation proceedings, and personal bankruptcy filings created a comprehensive financial disaster that left her in a worse position than she had ever faced before demanding my assets. "Rachel, it's all gone," Kelly called me directly for the first time since inheriting my properties, her voice broken and defeated as she faced the reality that her fresh start had become her complete destruction. "The banks are foreclosing on all the properties, the business equipment has been repossessed, and I'm facing personal bankruptcy with debts I can't discharge." The comprehensive loss of everything she had inherited, plus additional legal and financial obligations that exceeded her original problems, was exactly what I had expected would happen when someone with no business experience inherited complex financial arrangements that required ongoing competence and resources. "I don't understand how you managed all of this," Kelly continued, with what sounded like genuine recognition of the expertise she had dismissed while demanding my assets. "I thought property management was just collecting rent, but there were so many things I didn't know about maintenance, tenant relations, debt service, and business operations." The acknowledgement that successful real estate investing required knowledge and skills she had never developed was both overdue and irrelevant, since her education was coming too late to prevent the financial destruction that was now inevitable and irreversible. "Kelly, I tried to explain the complexity during the asset transfer process," I replied with no satisfaction in her suffering, but also no sympathy for consequences she had brought upon herself through entitled demands for unearned wealth. "You inherited 15 years of my learning along with the properties, but learning can't be transferred through legal documents." "Rachel, is there any way to undo the transfers or get help with the debt obligations?" Kelly asked with desperate hope that there might be some legal mechanism to reverse the consequences of her family's wealth redistribution scheme. "The assets and debts are legally yours now," I said with finality that reflected the irreversible nature of their accomplished redistribution plan. "You demanded ownership, and now you have both the benefits and the obligations that come with ownership. Have you ever watched someone learn that demanding other people's success without understanding its requirements ultimately destroys what they tried to steal?" That's exactly what had happened as Kelly's entitlement led to her complete financial ruin. "I should have listened to you about learning the business before taking over the properties," Kelly admitted with recognition that came months too late to prevent her disaster. "I thought wealth was just having money and assets, but it's actually about knowing how to create and manage wealth." The education about wealth creation was valuable, but irrelevant, since Kelly was now facing years of financial recovery from problems that were far worse than her original situation. Her bankruptcy would be more complex, her debt obligations would be larger, and her credit damage would be more severe than anything she had faced before demanding my assets. Meanwhile, I was already rebuilding my real estate career using the knowledge, relationships, and expertise that couldn't be redistributed along with physical assets. Within 6 months of the property transfer, I had identified new investment opportunities, secured financing for property acquisitions, and begun rebuilding the portfolio that would eventually exceed my original empire. "Rachel, how are you starting over so quickly?" my father Dennis asked during one of our rare conversations after Kelly's collapse. "I thought losing all those properties would set you back for years." "Dad, the properties were just tools for applying the real wealth, which is knowledge and expertise," I explained as I reviewed purchase agreements for my first new investment property. "Kelly inherited my assets, but she couldn't inherit my education, relationships, or business skills." The distinction between assets and capability was something my family was finally beginning to understand. Though their education was coming at a cost of hundreds of thousands of dollars and Kelly's complete financial destruction. 2 years after the disastrous wealth redistribution that was supposed to solve Kelly's problems while teaching me about family generosity, I owned 8 rental properties worth $1.6 million and operated a property management business serving 35 clients. Kelly was still in bankruptcy proceedings, living in a studio apartment, and working retail jobs while trying to service debts that would follow her for decades. "I finally understand why you were successful in real estate," Kelly said during a rare family gathering where we found ourselves in the same room. "It wasn't luck or natural talent. It was years of learning, working, and building expertise that I never appreciated or tried to develop myself." The recognition of what created and maintained wealth was educational, but irrelevant to her current situation, since understanding came too late to prevent the consequences of demanding assets, without accepting the responsibilities that made those assets valuable. If you're reading this and you're facing family pressure to redistribute your success to relatives who haven't earned it through their own efforts, please know that you have the right to protect your achievements from people who mistake entitlement for need and wealth for simple asset ownership. Sometimes the people who demand your success without understanding its requirements will ultimately destroy what they're trying to steal, while learning too late that wealth comes from competence rather than ownership. The most loving thing you can do for entitled family members is to let them face the consequences of their demands rather than enabling their continued avoidance of the personal development that creates genuine financial security. If this story resonated with your own experiences, please hit that subscribe button and share your experiences in the comments below. Have you ever faced family demands to sacrifice your achievements for relatives who hadn't earned them? How did you handle pressure to redistribute your success while maintaining your financial security and personal boundaries? Your story might help someone else who's struggling with similar family entitlement and wealth redistribution demands. Thank you for joining me on this journey from family pressure through asset redistribution to ultimate vindication and rebuilding. Remember that your success belongs to you, and that those who demand redistribution of unearned wealth ultimately reveal their inability to handle the responsibilities that make wealth creation and maintenance possible. See you in our next story here at Her Sweet Revenge.